My name is Alias. I can't make any sense, and I've tried for the last 20 minutes, but I cannot make any sense whatsoever of this idea of scales and percentages.
Okay.
What are the units on the scale? Is the scale logarithmic or non-logarithmic? And the comparable question for the percentages, we heard the figure 98. I can't make any sense of it. It's not that I don't think it's true, I just literally can't understand it.
Okay.
The percentage, which I think I learned in grade 9, is a numerator over a denominator. So in the percentages, 98 or 9.8, what are the values in the numerator, what are the values in the denominator? And that's comparable to the question, very comparable to the question of when you talk about the scale, that 1 to 7, what are the units?
Okay, that's a great question. So, this, to be clear, the Dawkins scale is not mine, it's Richard Dawkins and the God Delusion. I wish I had written that book, fantastic book. But when you're asking someone how confident they are in it, let's try not to overthink it. It's not a mathematical, it's common parlance. It's words that we use with others in the hopes that we can have a hook. We need some way to make an assessment of a stage so we can bring the intervention to them at that stage. So when you ask somebody for a percentage, you're not asking them for a precise mathematical formula of how they formed a belief. It's confidence value. How confident are you? If you don't like percentages, you can give them what's called a Likert scale. I am very confident, I am moderate confidence, I am less confident, I am not at all confident. And then you can do the same thing. The reason that I use percentages is because I've done this for so long now that those Likert scales aren't good enough, because I literally have specific questions that will differentiate. Red alert, Jim! Yeah, so that's the reason but if you're more comfortable with not asking for a percentage, or if you think that people can conceptualize it mathematically, all you're doing is asking someone, how confident are you? Are you extremely confident? I am extremely confident. Then you can just translate that in your head, 95%. Thank you.
Units of confidence. This is the same question over.
They're subjective values. They're subjective values to whatever people put. So, for example, in the Dawkins, in the God Delusion, 1 is absolute belief. That's his number that he assigns. 7 is absolute disbelief. The range in there is where someone would assign. Again, these are scalar properties only designed in the context of an intervention to give you an idea of the motivational interviewing, so you can match to the trans-theoretical model. That's the only, it's not to be, let's not overthink it. Thank you.
Let's not overthink it.
Yeah, let's not overthink the scale.
That sounds bad. That's not.
No, not overthink the scale.
Let's not overthink.
Yeah, okay, hold on. Let's give you something. Hold on. Here's why. Look at the idea of overthink for a second. If I said to you, who wants to volunteer?
I'll volunteer.
Is eating too much broccoli bad for you?
It really depends on what you mean by too much broccoli.
Yeah, okay, so that's a linguistic thing, right? So contained within the idea of too much is it is bad, right? So too much of anything is considered bad. So the idea of overthinking is inherently bad. So again, these are not strict, we're not doing mathematics. We're doing a clinical assessment of someone's epistemology so that we can know what questions to ask, so that we can appropriately target them. Good, thank you. Next question.
Hi.
Hi.
It's Pat here. You said that you can't get somebody to just change their mind immediately. I agree with that. Just by presenting facts, nobody's going to change their mind based on that. With that in mind, I'm wondering what you think of this, and this may seem like it's out of the realm of what you talk about, but I think it has to do with convincing people with facts. What do you think about this upcoming debate between Ken Ham and Bill Nye? Because it seems like what Bill Nye is going to do is go in there with a bunch of great facts. It's just going to wipe the floor with them. He's not going to convince anybody on the other side.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm completely against it. I wrote an op-ed for the New York Times that got rejected. I think it's a terrible idea. I agree with Dawkins, and that the problem with that, we talked about that at lunch, the problem with that is that you're conferring legitimacy on someone who simply has, that debate was, there is no debate.
No.
So the problem is that a question of giving a position legitimacy where it's not warranted. But the other problem with that is he's assuming that those people are anything other than pre-contemplative. In other words, he's assuming that they formulated their beliefs on the basis of evidence and came to that conclusion, and if you could just provide them with evidence, they'll change their mind. But the reason people dig themselves into cognitive sinkholes is not because they formulated their beliefs on the basis of evidence, but because they didn't. So my own opinion is that that's a terrible idea that legitimizes a position that's long discredited.
And Jeffrey, and I want to comment though, in the creation.
A little louder.
Oh, in the Creation Museum, there'll be some children who perhaps haven't created those beliefs first, and maybe Bill and I could actually reach them with facts that they're being taught in school. So that's why I'm in favor. But then my question is,
But before you give, can I comment on that
Yeah.
first, please? Okay, so I mentioned the TV show that we're doing where we go around to mosques, temples, churches, synagogues. So one of the things we'll do, people will come out and then I'll perform an intervention on them and I'll bring them one stage down. But what we do is we write down their numbers afterwards. I'm addressing your point about the children. This is where this is going. We conduct a follow-up with them afterwards to see if the intervention stuck. And what's very disturbing is that people get sucked back into these communities, because remember, a lot of these things are personal relationships that people have developed. So they get sucked back into these communities, and it doesn't matter what the community is. People who love them and care about them and show them kindness and tenderness, and they're sick, they take care of them. And so these are extra epistemological communities. In other words, these are communities that are not simply knowledge-based, but they have rules for moral living. So anything that could be said to these kids in the context of a debate between Bill Nye and Ken Ham, the problem with that is that those kids will then get sucked back into the community because they don't have the cognitive resources that they can draw upon to distinguish reality from make-believe land. So that, in my opinion, to the original questioner, is what the problem is. I'm adamantly opposed to it. But you had a question.
well, then my question is, when discussing with theists, it typically goes back to, well, atheism is just a religion.
Right.
And then, you know, if many of my theist friends were to have been here, they would have said, see, that's a religion. Because, you know, it's giving strategies of deprogramming, where they have strategies of programming. So how would you respond to a theist saying, well, this is a religion? What would you
That's an awesome question. And I've given 3 whole pages of the book to that. That exact question is in the book. Next.
Say buy the book.
Hi, my name's Angela. Regarding the DSM, which is the Diagnostic Manual for Mental Health Disorders, is there any progress being made on the removal of religious delusions as exempt delusions from the DSM?
That's a great question. So perhaps some background is necessary on that. That if one suffers from a religious delusion, and the DSM, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, you get a free pass. It's not classified as an exemption. So the question was, I was working with students and people to try to change that. And DSM-5 came out, and the next one won't be out for a number of years. To my knowledge, the answer is no.
Yeah.
No, that I'm doing or that I know, but that doesn't mean that somebody else isn't out there doing work. I just don't happen to know if that's the case.
I can answer that.
Oh, you can answer that. Perfect.
Also, yeah, what am I answering now? Yes, my name is Annette Horton. I happen to be a psychiatrist, retired. And it's not in the DSM because in psychiatry, the definition of a delusion is a fixed, false belief that is not in keeping with your religion or culture. So that's why it's not in there.
No, it's not in there. It's given a specific exemption. I write about this in my book, Chuck Knight. It's given a specific exemption if one suffers from a religious delusion. Now, there are things called culture-bound syndromes, and they are also not granted and DSM-4. I have not read the DSM-5, so I'm not qualified to speak to that.
So what were you disagreeing with me? I wasn't quite sure.
No, I was agreeing with you.
Oh, you are? All right, so a delusion is a fixed, false belief, but it mustn't be in keeping with your culture or religion.
Right.
Because you know, that's.
Right,
there
and
you
so
go.
I'm arguing, along with others, that exactly what you said, that's true, and I'm arguing that the word religion needs to be removed from that.
So if somebody says, I'm Jesus, I'm going to walk on water,
Yeah,
you
well.
give them a free ride.
There's
You
a,
don't
well, the
put them
answer is, there's a wonderful little a book, it's like a very small book you can read. You could never do a study like this today. It's called like The Three Jesuses of something. Basically 3 people who thought they were Jesus. The psychiatrist put them in a room with each other and they all had a conversation. I recommend that. That's available on Amazon.
Yeah, I love your phrase, extra epistemological communities. And I was wondering what you thought of the things like the Sunday Assembly as possibly a secular version of that.
Boy, you know, that's funny. No matter how many times I do these talks, I always get asked that question. I don't know, keeping with someone who asked me if atheism is a religion, I don't know anything about the Sunday Assembly. I've never gone to a Sunday Assembly. I have no idea what they're about. Well, I guess I just don't, the answer is I don't really know. I don't know enough about it. I don't know.
We've been. Hey, doctor. Oh, sorry.
So Peter, you call it.
My name is Luke there, doctor. If I understand your presentation correct, you're trying to move people from superstition to reality, from religion to fact.
No religion.
Okay, from superstition, from delusion to fact and reality.
No. Fact. So, no.
Can I use the term reality? 'Cause you use
Yeah,
it.
but not fact. So,
Okay.
from faith and superstition. So,
From faith and superstition
from make-believe
to
land to reality.
reality.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So my question would be this, essentially. Within the context of your atheistic worldview, the idea that there is no God, that there is no deity to whom you will answer to at the end of your life,
Okay.
within that context, why does it even matter who is right and who is wrong? Essentially, if atheism is indeed true, why does truth and reality even matter at all?
Okay, that's a wonderful question. I'm going to spend a few. I'm going to spend a few more moments on this. It's a good question. So, when someone says an atheistic reality, I should probably back up and give you my definition of atheism. Now, just because it's my definition of atheism doesn't mean it has to be your definition of atheism. And when I read the sheets, my definition of atheism is a little different, somewhat similar. Here's my definition of atheism. My definition of atheism, for me personally, I'm not saying you have to have this, my definition is, there is not sufficient evidence to warrant belief in a God or gods, but if I were given sufficient evidence, then I would believe. That's my definition of atheism. So, I don't know, here's a quick little way to think about it. When you think about what an atheist is, just substitute the word non-stamp collector. Every time you hear the word atheist, just make that little swap, that little substitution from atheist to does not collect stamps. The totality of people who do not collect stamps, there's such diversity among them. The only thing they have in common is the thing that they don't do, which is collect stamps. So I think the question goes in with a little misnomer. That being said, I think it's a very legitimate question, and I think it's a very good question, and I think it's a question that warrants a response, which is why I want to take a little more time. The problem is twofold. People have created communities, whether it's not eating pork, facing a certain direction, praying a number of times a day, whether it's discriminating against people on the basis of their sexual organs, testament of a man being worth more than a woman, whether it's, whatever it is, people have created communities in which they're basing their assumptions off of books that were written thousands of years ago. And if everybody had their own island, If everybody in here had an island that had water and everything they needed, it wouldn't be that much of a problem. But the problem is that we live in a democracy and we vote on issues and people can bring to the ballot things that are very hurtful to real people. And we need to look no further than that to what's happened to homosexuals. So part of the problem with that is that people who maintain these beliefs affect public policy. And it's hurting people.
Hi, my name is Jeff. I have a question. First of all, thank you for making your book affordable. As a parent and student, it's very nice to be able to buy an affordable book. Second of all, I have a bit of an issue. I've listened to interviews with you, and I really appreciate your focus on reason and not just heading to atheism. The issue I have is that I don't know if I have the confidence or style of character to take on someone like my wonderful and loving and sensitive and religious since birth mother. And so, like, the question would be either how should I pick my battles, or is this the type of thing that should be or could be the activity that anybody can do with anybody? Or are there some kind of battles that I should probably kind of stay away from?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's very reasonable. I can't tell anybody what types of relationships they should have with other people. I'm in no position in my life. My mom died last year. I'm in no position to tell anybody the type of relationship they should have with their mothers or anyone else, particularly their mothers. I will tell you that one thing that I've learned is that if you're sincere and you're honest with people, then they'll give you the same reciprocity back. And often people will disagree with you about very substantive issues, epistemological issues and metaphysical issues, what there is, and ethical issues, how one should live one's life. But invariably, if you're honest with people and you're forthright in your speech, people will respect you. So I can tell you that. And the other thing is, so yes, it's true when you read the book that I am looking for people who actively go out and help people develop more reliable epistemologies and lead them away from delusion. But I'm also wrote the book for people who just want basic tools if they have a sister or a friend of a friend, like we talked about, who does harbor these really silly beliefs, to help them. And so you need to do this at your own pace, in your own style, and maybe once you've done these, you've had these sincere conversations, these authentic, forthright conversations, maybe at that point that you'll be more comfortable with approaching a mother or not. And if you don't, that's fine too. Yeah.
First of all, thank you for coming today. I certainly appreciate it. I'm certain other people do as well. It's clear to me that behaviors and activities and beliefs that are rewarded, people cling to them. They strike out for it. They want to live it again and again and again. And so behavior that is rewarded is repeated again and again, and clearly religious beliefs are highly rewarded. And when you look upon it as a virus, and I do on a societal level, but on a personal level, I look upon it as somewhat of an addiction and a substance, not abuse, but substance dependency. And that substance, to me, from what I've read, is dopamine and a couple of other molecules that stimulate the 2 or 3 reward centers in the brain. So I look upon and I interact with people on the view that, they're getting rewarded big time for the beliefs, and rewards are also in the form of good food, being in good company, and as you pointed out, the community you're within, your church society, helps you big time.
So do you have a question for that?
Oh, okay, how about I just say this, that, do you think it must be rewarding, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I do, and I'd like to give people a book that they can read that's a game changer. Dr. Andy Thompson, he's also a psychiatrist, and it's published by Pitchstone Press, and it's a fantastic book. It's a short book, it's a little book, and it's an inexpensive book, and it basically goes through, we talked about dopaminergic reactions, so it basically goes through the processes of the brains and the structure of the brains and the covariance between the external biological mechanism of belief formation, the neural correlates of belief, and the culture in which one lives. And I would recommend that book as a very concise summary.
What's the book called?
It's called...
Why people believe in God?
Yes, that's exactly what it's called. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Robert, and I appreciate this talk as some criticism of belief without sufficient evidence. But I've been doing some research and peer-reviewed articles about faith and different philosophers of religion and so on. And it seems like belief without sufficient evidence isn't a good definition of what people actually mean by propositional faith. Faith in the phrase S has faith that P. So there's lots of examples of, people who have faith, but also having sufficient evidence. For example, the Bible. Sorry? Yeah. So with this, and there's other elements to faith that they identify. So why should I believe your definition of faith? What reasons do you have for that, rather than these careful conceptual analyses?
That's a good question. You shouldn't believe my definition of faith. You should take a look and do exactly what you did and look at, that's a mistake that people make in their thinking, is that they hear someone who gives a good speech, or they hear somebody whose beliefs accord with their own, or they really want to believe they were raised in a Christian household and they were taught that the miracles in the Bible were true, et cetera, et cetera. So what they do is that they only read those things that already agree with the beliefs they hold. But what we need to do is we need to read those things and subject ourselves to avoid a fallacy of confirmation bias with disconfirming evidence and disconfirming articles and disconfirming opinions. But the problem is, many, again, situated only in the context of Christianity, but many Christians will only read those thinkers like Josh McDowell or J. Warner Wallace or William Lane Craig, whose conclusions already agree with theirs. So that's the first one. Don't take anything I've said. I think the book has 18 pages of cited material, and I also go over a historical usage of the word faith as found in Hebrews 1:11, and I show how that word has changed over time. That being said, if you want to read people who are thoughtful and who have something substantive to say, we only have so much time in the day, and we need to pick who we read very carefully. The only person that I can recommend, and I think he's wrong, and I can tell you why he's wrong, and I can tell you why I think my definition of faith is far better, but again, I don't want you to believe me, is the former head of the American Philosophical Association, Alvin Plantinga, writes about warranted Christian belief and what that means to have warrant sufficient to justify one's beliefs. So the first point, if this nothing else, this whole talk should be against any form of doctrinaire thinking, should be against any form of dogmatism that we have to keep us close to our own beliefs. So read as many sources as you can, or pick the best sources that you can. That said, my definition of faith as pretending to know things you don't know and belief on the basis of insufficient evidence comes from the historical trace of the word of the words found in Hebrews 1:11, specifically the word elinkus, as it was used by the anonymous author of Hebrews, and then as Socrates used it, and I give a contrast. So that's in chapter 2. But again, don't stop there. Don't believe it. Don't believe any book. Look, your problems will begin, your epistemological problems will begin if you pick one book and toss everything else away. So don't do that.
In North America, according to population statistics, people identifying as religious has dropped. More and more people are saying they have no religious affiliation. And yet, anecdotally, I find people are more credulous. They believe the most amazing things. And as an amateur astronomer, I had to work really hard to convince people that the 2012 fiasco was absolutely ridiculous. Could you address that?
Yeah, sure. That's the other reason why I said this isn't about belief in God. You cannot believe in God, or you can believe in God, and then you can believe a whole set of completely unwarranted propositions. So belief in God is a symptom of an epistemology. So you have in Portland, you have many, trying to think of a way to say this that's at least somewhat politic, but you have a lot of hippies, yes. I was thinking hippies, but I didn't want to say hippies. It sounds a little condescending. But you have a lot of people who have belief in really some really outrageous healing claims from crystals and cats on the head. I told them. So people have these beliefs, and again, it's all a question of epistemology. You know, how someone, what evidence does one have? And I'm not even talking about the most fringe beliefs about faith healing, which we know we can demonstrate for a fact. We're talking about aromatherapy. I go to my dentist, he gives me aroma therapy. Look, smelling something and liking the smell of it is a subjective thing. I can give what did people used to wear in the 80s? Patchouli. You know, people, you can smell that and have any feeling you want and make any claim you want. The problem is when you give people aromatherapy, right? And they smell this, and then you say this correlates from the subjective to the objective. That there's something objective in the world that smelling this will do for you. Now that's great, you can claim anything you want. You claim the moon's made of green cheese, but it's irresponsible to make those claims when people use those. Very, very quickly, I don't know if you have them here, but in the United States, we have Whole Foods and New Seasons. Now you can go into almost any, can't remember, I always mix those two up in my head, but almost any, I think it's New Seasons, but I'm not sure, and you can see these homeopathic, they've really been careful recently what they've called them. Bottom line, the problem with that. The problem is that if you have an infection, and you think that taking a remedy, which is not a remedy at all, is going to fix your infection, then you still have the infection, and then you can go out and infect other people. So, I can't stress this enough, it's not belief in God. Belief in God is a symptom. You cannot believe in God and then believe in Santa Claus. It's the way that people come to knowledge.
Hi.
What's your name?
Emilio.
Emilio, that's a
name. I was in the States over the Christmas break, and Whole Foods, great store.
We'll sell the video to them.
Good. So question, how would you go about talking to somebody who would say that they are a person of faith, but has come to that by reason?
You get those, I think it's Jerry Coyne and a few others who have called those sophisticated theologians. I actually, those to me are my best conversation. I love to sit on planes next to people who have some apologetics training or trained to defend the faith or trained to think about these things in a more substantive level. So think about this. If somebody claims to formulate their beliefs on the basis of evidence, here's something you need to know. Joe claims to formulate his beliefs on the basis of evidence. By definition of what it means to formulate your beliefs on the basis of evidence, that must mean that there is some piece of evidence that could make you change your mind. That's what it means to formulate your beliefs on the basis of evidence. If not, you're formulating your beliefs on the basis of something other than evidence. Which, by the way, is wonderful if people engage in a conversation and they say to you, and this is why I get on extremely well with radical fundamentalists, they say, this is what I believe, you're wrong, you're going to hell, I have absolutely no reason whatsoever for believing it, it's in the Bible, I believe, or it's in the pick the whole book of your choice, I believe, end of conversation. But if somebody claims that there's a reason, then you can use the tools of rationality to look at those reasons and make them transparent, and you can have a discussion about those, and you can see, as one of the folks on this side of this question, you can see if those stand up to scrutiny, if those are warranted. I can tell you right now, you can cut to the chase when people make that claim by asking them 2 questions at the beginning of the conversation. Here's one: is your belief defeasible? In other words, under what conditions, even hypothetically, could your belief be wrong? That is from a philosopher by the name of Matt McCormick. So asking people how could their beliefs be wrong right from the get-go, if they say no, then the question to that, then there are a number of responses, but it's not clear how somebody can, on what basis one believes. So you don't formulate your beliefs on the basis of reason if they're not defeasible. The second question that you can ask somebody if they say they formulate their beliefs on the basis of evidence is, okay, so not only what we talked about before, what piece of evidence could make you change your mind? But let's talk about how do you weigh those? How confident are you in that? If you don't like the number scale, are you extremely confident to that? And then you can weigh those and you can look at those transparently so that you can have a conversation. You can go to the adult table with someone. Those would be the conversations, to me, personally, they're the most interesting conversations to have. So that's what I do. But make sure, right from the get-go, that they actually do believe on the basis of reason and evidence, and they're not just giving that's not verbal behavior. They actually believe it.
Howdy.
Howdy.
We may live in the Bible Belt, but I know a lot of people, especially working here, students in the boat. How do you feel about agnostics, and where does agnosticism fit into all this?
I just wrote a foreword to a book by another Canadian. I have my pin. I'm already by a Canadian, and I talked about how I personally don't like. Where's my I personally don't like the word agnosticism. I talk about this in the book. Let me give you an example. Do you believe that there's this bunny called the Easter Bunny, and he gives money or candy or whatever to kids once they lose their teeth?
Yes.
You do?
That's the tooth fairy.
Oh, is it? Okay, I got those confused. I'm dealing with so many people's delusions for so long now. I'm sorry. The tooth fairy. So you don't believe there's an actual tooth fairy. So you're not a tooth fairy agnostic. You're a tooth fairy atheist. So we can dispense with the word agnosticism. In order to be an agnostic, you have to have sufficient reason or sufficient evidence to even make you think it's possible. In other words, the default of anything should not be maybe. The default of anything should be highly unlikely, but show me the evidence until I get to maybe. And again, that's why we need faith, because faith is the thing that picks up the slack from the confidence for how confident we are in a belief to the actual number or how confident we say we are.
So if you can move somebody, though, from a 1 on the scale to a 3, like if you can move them towards agnosticism from the 1, that's good though, right?
No, because my goal is not to make people atheists. My goal is to clean up, is to help people develop epistemologies that they can rely upon to lead them to the truth. I could make look, you could go out and you could convince everybody to be an agnostic, but that doesn't mean they're not going to put a cat on their head when they have an illness.
Hello, everyone. I'll try to keep this under 30 seconds. As a preamble, I've had many of these conversations which you've described. I love doing them, and it usually ends with the person I'm debating.
Can I guess? I'll pray for you?
No, it usually ends with the smug condescending. That's why they call it faith, which means to me you've got nothing else. My question is, with the current situation, it is my belief that a large number of people who call themselves believers are actually atheists still in the closet. And more powerful than actually debating them one-on-one is the role model. It's the Ricky Gervais being interviewed on a talk show and laughing at the concept of religion, of Bill Maher's monologues. It's showing the ludicrousness of it and bringing the humor in as a weapon. And I'd like your opinion on that.
Yeah, okay, so what you've just spoken about is our macro interventions. You're talking about Colbert. I think, yeah, Colbert or Jon Stewart or Bill Maher. Yeah, I would never profess to tell anybody what kind of comedy they should do. I don't ever ridicule someone's beliefs. I don't draw pictures of the Muslim prophet Muhammad. I just don't do that because the research literature is clear. In these one-on-one interactions and these interventions, the way to help people overcome their delusions is to go at it from a position of safety so people don't feel threatened, so their defensive postures aren't invoked. So I'm not saying that Bill Maher, Ricky Gervais, or any of these people are wrong. That's just not a style that I adopt, and that's not one that I advocate on a one-to-one level to help people. Look, and I just don't like to ridicule people. It's not who I am. So. No.
Hypothetical. Basically, you go to a highly Muslim country where basically you have to say 90% of the population will believe. How would you think? Sorry, if you were in a highly Muslim country where you had like 90% of the population with one standard belief, how would you think you could go about trying to deconvert people or to bring them to the truth of the fact in that kind of an area?
If I ever got off a plane in a Muslim country and they Googled me,
They go Google?
so at one point I issued a challenge to Muslim apologists. I was actually going to do a film in which I went to the Muslim world and debated Muslim apologists, and the tentative title that I had for the film was Unbelievable. And my wife said, I have a better title. How about Stupid? Yeah, it's a tricky question because there are laws. Islam is a tricky thing, and even attempting something like that is, in many countries, that's outlawed. So the other thing is that we tend to think of, even Sunni and Shia, these splits, we tend to think of Islam as this monolithic block. It's not. It's affected by tribes, by different cultures, by economic situations, by political realities, geopolitics. So it's impossible for me to give an answer without knowing more specific details. And the best answer I could give might not be a satisfactory one, but it's true, and that's I don't know. It's a very complicated question, but the way to think about that or conceptualize it would be you'd need to know what the variables are, so then you could formulate a strategy to address those.
I hear you. Thanks for coming here.
Thanks
I
for
agree
coming.
with some of your comments on the fact that religions cannot be true, because when you do the logical analysis, in the Islamic faith, you're only guaranteed a heaven if you are a martyr or you kill an unbeliever. Whereas Christians the other way, if you know Jesus, he's the only way to heaven. So they can't all be true. And I also really agree with your comments on the cults, because there's many people that are held in bondage, right? And the consequences if they come out of their faith are huge.
Yeah.
And it's very sad. So I agree with that. And I love your desire to help people see the truth. So thank you very much for that.
I can send the button.
So we'll take it to Tim Hortons afterwards. Gotta have it soon. So my question, when it comes to something like Christianity, Jesus was different in that other religions seek God, whereas in the case of Christianity, Jesus came to seek people, and he pursued them. And he's different in that he's the only religious figure that claims to have come back to life. So the cross on which Jesus paid the penalty for people's sins,
Yeah.
and on the resurrection, if he's the only one that came back to life, if it's true, that's pretty significant. If he didn't come back to life, then you can throw out Christianity, and the Bible even says that. So if he did come back to life 3 days later, and there's lots of evidence that people will talk about, Lee Strobel's book and that. So
The Case for Christ is the book.
Yeah. So what's your rationale or logic that gives you 100% certainty that Jesus did not come back to life after 3 days?
That's a great question. I'll take another moment to answer that. Okay, so that gets back to the idea, somebody said unawares, that he didn't like the confidence value thing. But that's a really good example of when we need to assign a confidence value to a belief. I want to be crystal clear. I am not 100% certain about the claims of any religion. If I were to tell you I'm 100% certain, that would mean that I'm closed to any evidence that could come into the contrary, and that really isn't true. So somebody asked me in an interview, "Oh, what would happen if people got your book and then they started talking to people and they realized, that they made, millions of Muslims?" That would be awesome. that would mean that there was sufficient evidence to warrant belief in the claims of Islam, and so then the book, then this would be quite a different talk, wouldn't it? I'd be up here talking about Muhammad. So if the idea then that somebody is 100% closed off, I would advocate to every single person in here, you ought not to be. You ought to be open to the possibility that Jesus Christ rose from the dead. And I say that with total sincerity. I am open to that if I'm shown sufficient evidence. I do not think that the evidence is even remotely sufficient to warrant that belief. So then the next reasonable question would be, well, how certain are you? Okay, well, how certain am I? A number far, far, far below 1%, but not 0. So I am open to the possibility, but it is an extraordinary claim, and then I would have to see evidence. Now I want to throw out one more thing. Then the question becomes, so if you look at the Islamic religion, Islamic apologists are very different from Christian apologists. Often in Christian apologists, you'll see a hostility towards science. In Islamic apologists, you'll see these ideas that there are things in the Quran, that the Quran is the perfect book, and the Quran made the only book you'll ever need, made these astonishing predictions for the future, for how to live, et cetera, that these things have come true. Different than the concept of miracles in the Bible. So we need to be open to the idea that these various faith traditions are all true, provided we have sufficient evidence. There is a line of literature that I can recommend to you, starting with Bart Ehrman, and ending in, well, the ending in a lot of people, but yeah, I was trying to think ending in who, but ending in the more extreme versions of like Richard Carr, who even deny the historical Jesus. It's a long answer, but the idea is basically, you would have to make that evidence, to make that claim, you would need a lot of evidence. And the evidence that you would have to have one other factor. You'd have to be able to rule out alternative possibilities. And because we can't rule out alternative possibilities, at least not that I read this stuff constantly, at least that I've ever seen, then why would we need to invoke faith at all? Like, why would we even need, what would give someone the idea that we should have faith in this? That's a misaligning of the confidence value of a belief to the evidence we hold for the belief. But that doesn't mean either that there's no evidence at all. It just means that the evidence is not sufficient to warrant belief. And in my subjective number schema that I put on it, I put on a 0.0001, and I'll sit here for 10 minutes saying, oh, 1. But that doesn't mean I'm closed to the possibility. From my open heart, I am closed to the possibility if I've seen the evidence. Good question.
Peter, I'm Sue Bright. I'm a Baha'i, and I'm a 1. So I bought your book. So anyway, it seems that my question is, who were the founders of faith then? Like Abraham, Moses, Krishna, Buddha, Jesus, Muhammad, and the Baha'i prophets are the Baba and Baha'u'llah. Like, one of the Baha'i principles is the independent investigation of truth. So I'm actually with you on a lot of the things that you've said, but I'm also an anesthesiologist, so I'm science and religion. And one of the principles there is that, like, I don't think that science and religion are mutually exclusive. So anyway, just wondered what your thoughts are. Also, in Abbotsford, they have something called Bridges of Faith. So the atheists are part of that. And so we actually think that's pretty good, where the Muslims and the Baha'is and the Christians and the Buddhists get together and try to do, I don't know, social good. So
anytime that people can communicate with each other is good.
Yeah, I think basically, who were the founders of faith? What do the atheists think? Who was Buddha?
I am the voice for the atheist. If I understand your question, so it depends what you mean by who are the founders of faith. I mean, different faith traditions have different ways that they proselytize. They have different histories. They have different, Sharia traditions. They have different. That's integral. So it's like I can't really point to any one I mean, we've only talked about the Abrahamic faith traditions, but you can even go beyond the Abrahamic faith traditions to take a look. I don't know how to answer your question, as I don't know that there were any one particular founder of the faith movement. Well, like L. Ron Hubbard maybe, but I think that these things take place in a cultural context with a tremendous number of variables in play. Unsatisfying answer, but an honest one.
Maybe here is this. I'll just be healed, man. Question, I mean, when it comes to and seeking the truth is key, and I love your desire for seeking the truth and continuing to learn. When it comes to any book, we can all write a book, right? History, and say this is the truth, and away we go. Get our own religion going. And I think a lot of these faiths started from self-serving individuals, right? When it comes to something like the Bible, one of the things that differentiates it are the predictions or prophecies for the future. So there's been, for instance, in today's world, it was prophesied that Israel would be disbanded and then would come back together, which it did in 1948. It says that Egypt would never rule another country, which it never has. Damascus would be destroyed, which unfortunately may be going on now.
I hope not.
Yeah, I hope not either. It's tragic, right? It really is. But we could be living in that time. My question is, have you ever done a prophetic study of all the prophecies in the Bible, of which over 100 have come true, and from that have evidence that gives you comfort that those prophecies did not come true as they're foretold?
Okay, let's take a look at this. This is, fortunately, unfortunately, this is another question that requires a longer answer. Okay, so we can take a look at virtually, and in fact, I'm not even going to speak in hypotheticals. If you Google, and I'll answer your question directly, but I'll toss a way that people think about these things that I think is problematic. If you Google the prophecies of Nostradamus, for example, you will find an unbelievable literature, admittedly nowhere even close to the literature that's developed around the Bible, but you will find an incredible literature that's rich and interwoven like a majestic tapestry that details all of the predictions, and it's really remarkable. And there's even convergence among who the three brothers are. That's one of the quatrains about the Kennedys, the assassination. This is what would be much more convincing to me if it said, at this day, at this time, exactly, this person would emerge, or this thing would happen, this event would occur. But even that wouldn't be sufficient to warrant belief. Here's what it would take for me to look at that and not import my belief first on it. If it had the solution, and this is where Islam is extremely interesting that Christianity does not address, if it had a solution to a timeless mathematical problem, or if it gave answers that said, for example, Goldbach's conjecture is this, and if the book listed all of these things. I don't know if you had an opportunity to see, and I will answer your question directly about prophecy. I don't know if you had an answer to see the conversation I had with Richard Dawkins, but this came up, and I'm going to relate this to your previous question of what, is my belief defeasible? What would it take for me to believe? Under what conditions could it be true? Well, here is a condition that would make it not true. Or if I had any feeling state that I have, I would not assume that I could have confidence or faith or trust that the feeling state I had accurately mapped onto the reality outside of me. Okay, so then the question is, well, what if it's not a feeling state? What if you walk outside tomorrow, and this is taken from the Krauss book. Are you okay?
No, yeah.
Okay.
I just burped, that's
Okay. So let's take something like you walk outside and the stars are aligned that say, I am God, believe in me, and somebody from France or Montreal sees that and it's in French, and someone from Spain, just pulling that out of my hat, it's in Spanish. Would that be sufficient evidence to warrant belief? Now, the only reason I'm saying this is to show that different people have different epistemic standards for what constitutes reliable evidence. This may shock you, but the answer for me would be no. Whereas I would guess if you ask people of faith, and I don't know, you'd have to ask them, is this sufficient evidence for you? I would bet that they would say yes. So different people have different calibrations internally for what constitutes available. I would think I've been dosed by LSD. I would think that I'm the victim of a hallucination. I would think that I'm delusional. I would think that, although I would certainly say I would be massively freaked out to the very least. Okay. So then the question becomes, if it's not a feeling state, and it's not a perception, and it's not something where you walk out and there are glowing orbs that say, Jesus was here, or God lives in you, or believe in, what have you, that would still not be enough. Here's the reason why that would not be enough. Because I would have to rule out alternative explanations. I would have to rule out the possibility that there was an alien trickster culture who had put glowing orbs down. In other words, I couldn't look at a phenomena and draw a line from the phenomena to the conclusion that God exists. So even if it were the case that some book could be shown that had alleged prophecies that could or could not, would that be sufficient evidence to warrant belief? No. For me, no. And the reason for that is that would get multiple reasons. One, you couldn't rule out alternative explanations, alternative hypotheses for why that could come to pass. But the other, perhaps more interesting reason is, what could that be evidence of? So why is it that people think they'll draw a line from the phenomena they examine, and then they'll make a truth claim, and they'll say, this, because of this phenomena, I conclude this. Well, someone here was a philosophy student, obviously. You could look at that syllogistically. Premise, conclusion. The premise is, we're given this, these may have been predictions. The conclusion does not follow there is God. You could have any one of a number of conclusions for that, if you took a look. Here's the other thing. Why is it that independent people take a look at the same evidence, sincere, honest, rational people, and they come up with totally different conclusions? The answer is that our brain is an engine of belief, and we all have cognitive biases that go into these things. So there was excuse me for the incredibly long answer, but it was a good question that deserved a longer answer. Even if it could be shown that there was some overlapping similarity, if anything, that would maybe move me to, instead of 0.01 sitting here for 10 minutes, I'd be at 8 minutes. So it'd be 0.000, and then 8 minutes later, 1. So those would constitute not even enough evidence to even begin to warrant a maybe. And the way I see it is people then leap to these conclusions. Whereas to me, and then I'll shut up. To me, it's much more honest to say, I've decided to believe this. If an independent, objective person were to look at this text, they would not come to this conclusion. I had someone from Mars who was really smart, who had no cultural underpinnings, they looked at this text, they would not draw the same conclusion. That, by the way, is called the outsider test of faith by a guy by the name of John W. Loftus. Thanks, great question.
Hi, I'm Dylan, and my question is, when discussing faith traditions, the word racism sometimes comes up.
Yes.
And I'd like to hear your response to a word like Islamophobia that makes faith and race synonymous.
I write about that in chapter 8 of the book. So that's a great question, and that's a highly politicized question. So here's my take on it. Is it the case that there are some groups, individuals, political parties, I mean groups loosely, that use Islam as a proxy for race because they're racist pigs? The answer is absolutely yes. The answer is unquestionably there are some groups or individuals or political parties that do not like dark-skinned people, and they use Islam as an excuse to smear an entire group of people. That is true. Okay, let's take, so in any discussion of that, we have to keep that in mind, that because those vile people exist, they complicate everything else. they complicate the matter of somebody giving a criticism of an idea that's actually not a racial criticism. So the problem is that because there are some people who use Islam as a proxy for race, that, among other things, the problem is that if you're having a conversation with somebody and you're making a criticism of an idea, that's not the same as a criticism of a person. We should be able to criticize any idea or set of ideas that we want to criticize. That problem is even worse in academia because academicians are petrified of talking about Islam. And it's even worse in the UK, for example. Recently, there have been seating issues where men want to sit in one side, women want to sit in other sides, and instead of calling that idea out for as repugnant of an idea as it is, and you don't have the separate but equal here, but if I say separate but equal and you're American, that would fill you with horror. When blacks would go to school systems that were separate but equal. So Islamophobia then is in academia what it's turned into. It's if I have a rational critique of somebody's epistemology that I disagree with, and I can give my reasons for that, and I'm called an Islamophobic. Think about that. A phobia is an irrational fear. I'm told that I'm told that my epistemological critique, my rational, thoughtful, well-reasoned critique, is then a phobia of another group of people. And I think that's a huge problem. I think we should be able to criticize ideas, but not people. And multiculturalism has contributed to that confusion by conflating the criticism of a person with the criticism of an epistemological system. We should be able to criticize any epistemologies we want, freely and openly in the classroom, in the streets, anywhere we want, without having a phobia.
I want to make two quick comments before I ask my question. One was when you talked about Nostradamus, you didn't mention, but I think it bears mentioning, that the reason that people believe all his predictions is that they're couched in such terms, they probably predicted my birth too. So, Nostradamus knew my parents were going to get married and have me. The other thing is, later on, if we have a chance, ask one of us about what just happened at York University in Toronto.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not familiar with that. Was that,
I didn't think you would be.
The man who didn't want to be with the woman in the group?
Yeah. Okay, so you do know about it. Okay, here's really what I stood up for, which is, I'm a mother. I'm about to be a grandmother in May.
Congratulations.
When Ulrich and I had our one and only daughter, we decided before she was born to tell her the truth about everything. She knows that the tooth fairy, as she puts it, that's when Daddy puts money under your pillow when you put your tooth in. She loved it. She had no problem with the fact that there was no whatever coming in during the night because she knew it was her dad. We never told her anything about Santa Claus. We told her other people believe this, and parents will get really pissed off at you if you tell their kids the truth, but we told her the truth. All this. Because the reason we did this is we feel, I personally feel, if you lie to a child about Santa Claus, you destroy the child's belief in you, trust, not belief, trust in you forever.
It's a gateway belief.
That's very well put. So now, here's my question. How do we convince other parents who damn well know there ain't no Santa Claus to stop lying to their children?
Why would we want to do that?
I love Santa Claus.
I believe in Santa Claus.
I love it when everybody asks me questions if I'm supposed to know the answer to all the world's social ills. I don't really know. I'm just trying to find one parallel time. Santa Claus. I've always advocated being forthright with your children. I'm not sure I'm the best parent myself, so I don't know how well situated I am to give parental advice. But I'm honest with my children. If they ask me a question, then I'll tell them the answer. I don't think I've lied. I've certainly told my children when they've asked me questions that I'm not going to answer those questions, but I haven't lied to them. I think part of this is, it gets back to what we talked about before. Again, if someone doesn't formulate their beliefs on the basis of evidence, there's no evidence that you can give them. I personally think that the solution to this whole problem is by helping people value the right things, by helping people value the role of evidence. for one. So think about this. There are two reasons people will have beliefs, two basic reasons, two epistemic reasons people will have beliefs that are out of line with reality. One is they'll formulate a belief on the basis of insufficient evidence. But the other, far more common, is that they'll formulate a belief on the basis of what they thought was evidence, but was actually not evidence. It wasn't sufficient. They assign higher confidence values to the source of their beliefs. The problem with that is that skews or twists their whole belief system. So I personally haven't seen any evidence about Santa Claus or truth fairy, but my suspicion, I wrote a paper about this, it got rejected, so I guess someone didn't like the idea, but my personal suspicion is that those really are gateway beliefs, that you'll see that it's very easy for people to compartmentalize really wild, crazy, unbelievable, extra silly beliefs like in some of the Mormon traditions. People will be able to take those beliefs, but be anesthesiologists. I just pulled that word, or engage in some kind of very technical form of whatever it is that they're doing. It's not clear to me how we could test that. Like, how could you test the belief that believing in Santa Claus is a gateway belief? That's part of the problem, is that even though I think it's true, I have to assign a low confidence value to that belief, because I don't know how you would need multiple groups of people who believed in Santa, who didn't believe in Santa. You'd have to test them long term to see what they believe. That is my suspicion. I do not have any evidence for that.
You're right about that, because that's the scientific method. But look at a child. When that child at the age of 7, 8, 9 finds out the truth, look at the look on their face. They are embarrassed.
Oh, rubbish.
All right, moving on. Moving on.
My name's Henry. Just returned from Israel. I want to mention something about the Abbotsford police. I've been told by my policeman friend that if an accident occurs, 3 or 4 people bear witness to that accident. That's sufficient evidence for believing that it happened the way they said. I'm thinking of your example of Jesus walking on the water. There were 4 people that wrote about the same thing. They were not conferring with each other, said the same thing. That has lasted for 2,000 years. Is that insufficient evidence for me to believe that Jesus really did walk on the water? Furthermore...
Hold on, one time. I can only take one time. You've asked me a question that people have written PhD dissertations on that I have 2 minutes for. So, here's what we know, and I don't want you to believe me when I tell you this. I would urge you to look. I'd give you some of the citations for this. We know that the way that our brains are wired is that we place more evidence on testimony than we ought to. So, for example, the first thing you said, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know anything about the Abbotsford police, but hopefully I never will.
Not as long as you have that badge.
Yeah, there you go. So if it takes 3 witnesses. Now, I would guess that they would know the witnesses, they would know where the witnesses lived. Again, as I used the example of Nancy and Jeff, we could check on the witnesses, we could put them in court, we could cross-examine that. What we have now comes from one document, and those claims, they're different there's a difference between a historical claim and a theological claim. So the question is, let's say that I want to take a look at how we can evaluate that claim. I want to give that a fair, unbiased, to the best of, nothing's truly objective, but to the best of my ability, I want to be a sincere inquirer who takes a look at that. Here's one of the things that you can do to take a look at that. I'll give you three things you can do. One thing you can do is I'll reference what I talked about before, the outsider test of faith. You can use exactly the same tools that somebody would use in another faith tradition to evaluate the claims in your own faith tradition. So, for example, do you think that Muhammad rode to heaven on a winged horse? Well, there's testimony that he rode to heaven on a winged horse. Why would you discredit that testimony?
How many were there that say that?
What?
How many others were there that claim that?
Anybody know?
A billion Muslims?
Does it matter if it was 2 or 7 or 12?
Well, let's say that it was, I don't know, I don't think, I mean, you're actually asking the wrong person, because, look, even when you ask me how many people were there, well, I don't think he rode to heaven on a winged horse, so any number that I could give doesn't even make any sense at all. But the idea, one way to answer that question is to take the same tools or standards of reason that you use to evaluate and come to the conclusion, the same epistemology that you use to evaluate Muhammad, the fact that Muhammad did not fly to heaven on a winged horse, and use those identical systems of evaluation to Jesus walking on water. And if you still conclude at the end of that Jesus did walk on water from using the same tools, one of two things must have to happen. Then you must also increase the confidence value in the superstitions of other faith traditions, and not just your own superstitions. But the other thing that should happen is that you should then increase the confidence value that that's true. Now, I'm going to throw one more thing out at you. Now, remember the idea of defeasibility. What evidence could you be shown? What evidence could someone have to show you for you to come to the conclusion that that belief was false? Let's go back to your idea of the traffic thing. 3 cops and 3 cops in. Now let's make this fun. Well, fun is probably the wrong word for the example I'm going to use, but let's make this more interesting and say that, okay, unfortunately, somebody was seriously injured. If somebody was seriously injured, well, under what circumstances would you doubt the testimony of the people? You have 3 people. Well, here's an example. I'll give you an example right now. They were paid off. I don't have any evidence that they were paid off, but they were paid off. Or maybe they were high on drugs. Or, in other words, I'm giving you conditions under which the testimony would be suspect. So, that's the first one. I'll give you 2 more if you want. But that's what I would suggest. Use the same tools of analysis that you use to make that argument, to analyze that as you would any other superstition. And if your answer is, yes, it just happened, then that to me makes it far more interesting. I'll give you 2 more if you want, but that's a good start.
My friend was bringing up the prophecy thing. That's one of the reasons I went to Israel. I want to study carefully, and this is my 2nd trip there, to find out whether what Isaiah, Joel, and many other prophets are saying about Israel's return in the last days is actually happening today exactly as they said it would. Am I a fool to believe that?
No, he's not a fool. No, look, no, actually no. No. People aren't a fool if they have a belief that doesn't align with reality. Anyone who thinks they don't have a belief that doesn't align with reality, their beliefs are inerrant. They need to take a long, hard look in the mirror. One thing you can ask yourself is, am I willing to revise my beliefs? Now, if you're not willing to revise your beliefs, then you suffer from some kind of epistemological pathology. It's a serious problem. It's a serious problem, again, because you can take a look at other people who have different beliefs. But just because somebody is taken in by a belief that may or may not be true, that doesn't make them a fool. It just means they're mistaken. Now, you might not be mistaken. If you're not mistaken, there's only 1 of 2 other possibilities. 1 is that you're correct, and 2 is that you're delusional. And the only way to figure that out would be to take a look at the evidence that you have to warrant your belief in the first place. And once we do that, then we can have a conversation. But no, I absolutely do not think that you're a fool, and I do not think that anybody who buys into a set of ideas is a foolish person at all. I think if you're willing to revise your beliefs, and you're really sincere about that, that's a prophylactic to prevent you from falling into delusion. As long as you keep those 2 things, the American Philosophical Association has a report. Anybody can Google it. It's called the Delphi Report. It gives the 2 things you need to think critically: a skill set, which you can learn in 15 minutes, and an attitude. And 2 of those attitudinal dispositions are a trustfulness of reason and a willingness to reconsider. And if you go in not with confirmation bias, not seeking what's in your heart to be true, but if you actually look at the evidence, because what's in your heart can be conditioned culturally and socially. If you actually look at the evidence, and you're sincere in your investigation, and you're willing to change your mind, well then, chances are it's pretty good. You've done, that's a life worth leading. Doesn't matter what conclusions you come to.
We'll take these last two questions and then we'll wrap things up.
Hi, my name's Chrissy.
Hi, Chrissy.
So my older brother was healed of a brain tumor when he was a baby. And so my question is, how would you argue someone's personal life experience? So someone who has been like restored, redeemed, and like transformed by God. How would you?
All right. So it's always interesting. So they think that so he was healed, but what makes them conclude that it was by God?
So my family, like my parents are Christian.
Yeah.
And so we all separated from seizures when we were babies. And so he was in the middle of a seizure, and they took him to the doctor, and they were like, your son actually has a tumor on his brain. And he was very young, so I guess surgery would be very difficult. So, and my pastor was there, and he's like, well, let's pray over him right now. Like, and then they took him home,
Okay.
And the doctors were like, come back for another appointment, like, we'll see what we can do. And they came back, and they did what's it called?
CAT scan.
There you go, yeah. And they did that, and his brain tumor was actually gone.
Okay, so that's a claim. We can test those claims. So we can test the claims. We can test the claims of faith healing, and we have. And I'll give you a piece of evidence for that, and then I'll just give you a tool set, a way to think about that. So once we make these claims that through praying or what have you, people can be healed, that's a claim about the world. That's no longer a claim about aromatherapy, making you feel good. That's a claim that has a specific manifestation order. We've tested that. The Harvard Prayer Study is the largest prayer study ever. And it found that it's what's called intercessory prayer. Intercessory prayer is like this person will pray for this person. It's not a person praying for themselves, it's someone else praying for someone else. And they found that prayer had no significant effect on healing outcomes whatsoever. Now, let's say that we did that study, and it found exactly the opposite, that prayer did. Would that get back to the other gentleman's question? You said he was your friend. Is he in here? Yeah, so that gets back to you. So the question then would be, would that constitute sufficient evidence to warrant the belief that prayer was effective? Now, as I mentioned, different people have different internal calibrations for what they consider to be evidence. My answer to that would be no. But what it would constitute is a really good reason to do another study, to see if you could duplicate those results. Now, let's say you do duplicate those results. Well, now we're talking. Now we can do a massive study. And we don't just have to do it with cardiac. But again, we never got to that point. So here's the other thing. Why is it that God always heals things we don't see? He doesn't heal cases of Down syndrome. He doesn't heal people who suffer from retardation. He doesn't grow back limbs. He doesn't heal amputees. It's always these internal things. Now, we also know that's complicated by the fact that there are people who are shysters. There's a great little video. Darren Brown did this video where he trained somebody to be a quote-unquote faith healer. If you haven't seen it, it's fantastic. So I would say that does... We know, for example, in the study of alcoholism, that people spontaneously remit. Pretty hardcore alcoholics, they remit all the time, spontaneously, just like that. So just because a phenomena happened, again, you can't, that's a false attribution of what the cause could be. The cause for that could be anything. So you'd have to rule out other causes. One can't assume that it was faith or anything else, or Jesus, or the Buddha, or Allah. You don't have enough evidence for that. You couldn't make that claim sincerely and honestly. Now, you could hope that it's the case. You hope for anything you want, but that doesn't make it true. Your hope for something doesn't correspond to reality. We have the last one?
Yeah, we have it right here. Can I just make a comment on this?
Yeah.
What's more likely? Whether somebody was healed by a miracle or the doctor misdiagnosed the initial problem? I believe it was more likely the doctor that misdiagnosed it. Sorry, there's a question.
Yeah.
As I understand it, you say that we construct our beliefs by evidence. Faith might be something you call evidence. So we develop a belief following a path from nothing to the belief that we hold on to. Anybody who's debated theists particularly remembers a moment where you've hit them with a question that you can see that they have never conceived of that before. It's complete out of left field. You see their eyes come open. You see the brain whirling, and then wham, they throw out an answer. And then they start to construct, to backfill, to justify the answer. Now, that falls in line with what I understand Daniel Kahneman's work saying, or presuppositionalists.
Thinking fast and away.
Now, how do you align those two things? I want to put what you're saying together with what he's saying. I think they are in line, but I'm just missing it.
Yeah, no, that's in the book, so I read about that in the footnote. Are you talking about thinking fast, thinking slow?
Yes.
Yeah, here's the problem with that, and I don't know if this is the answer you're looking for, but I think this is a way to think about it. So if I'm having a discussion with somebody about something, let's say I'm having a discussion with you, or with guy, Jeff, I drove in with about gun control. I mentioned this in the talk. Part of the problem isn't that I'm gun-ho on gun control, or gun-ho on gun for every family. No, but part of the problem is that people hold the notion that they're a better person if they believe X about gun control, if they take a certain side. So part of the problem is when we have a discussion about, again, it doesn't have to be about anything, and you bring a point up that I haven't heard of, I should say, wow, that, I didn't think about that. That's really cool. I need to reevaluate my belief. I need to take this new argument or this new piece of evidence, this data point into account. I might have to think about my belief. The problem with faith is that people are taught apologetics. They're taught to defend that. And in the Gorgias, Socrates says it's better to be refuted than it is to refute. So people are taught to defend or to hold tight, and various apologist doesn't mean I'm sorry for my belief, a defender of the faith. Various apologists have come up with this notion that we need to hold tight to a belief. But that's exactly the opposite of what the American Philosophical Association's Delphi report on critical thinking is. It's willingness to revise a belief. So people have the value that they ought not to revise their beliefs. And this is made worse by praying about it, right? This whole problem is then complicated epistemically. It's like a form of epistemic suicide. Because I don't want to ideate anybody to go do crazy things now, but the idea is that people then get this idea in and they pray, and that increases the confidence value in beliefs they have, which they should decrease the confidence values in the beliefs that they have. So I would take that idea and I would pack that with the idea, very briefly, all the time, of the injection of System 1 thinking into System 2 thinking. We can talk more about that, but it's in the book. Thank you, everybody, very much.